Cremation? It's being normalized more and more today as a modern, convenient choice. But how many truly understand what happens to the soul after the ashes are scattered? Could the way we leave this world affect our eternal destiny? Today, you're about to hear a terrifying testimony from a woman who died, but came back with vivid memories of hell and an unexpected encounter with Jesus himself. There, he revealed a shocking truth about the fate of cremated souls, something that may completely shake your understanding of life after death. If you've ever had a loved one or friend who was cremated, or if you're currently preparing for a funeral, then please listen to this story in full before you make any final decisions. It just might make you see everything in a new light. Before we begin, please leave your name and the city you're watching from so we can pray for you. And if this story touches any part of your soul, we invite you to support this mission by clicking the Super Thanks button. Whatever you give, God will return to you 100-fold. Together, let's build a strong community of faith by subscribing to this channel, a place where 20,000 hearts are sharing the love of Christ this month. Now, here is her testimony. As I recount these memories, I've had to ask my granddaughter Emily to write them down for me, because my eyes no longer see clearly. My trembling hands can only grip my cane, while she sits beside me wide-eyed, marveling at every word I speak. "Grandma, that's unbelievable!" Emily exclaimed, her voice full of emotion, as if she herself were living inside my story. I gave her a faint smile, but my heart felt heavy. How can one ever retell a whole lifetime? A life filled with love, heartbreak, and the kind of scars no one else sees. My name is Eleanor. I'm 78 years old, and I live in an old wooden house on the outskirts of Boise, Idaho. My entire life has been a long journey of sacrifice, sweat, and tears to raise 3 children: James, Sarah, and Michael. After my husband Frank fell during a shootout with drug traffickers, it was 1975, and my children were still so young. James was just 10, Sarah 8, and Michael only 5. Frank, a brave police officer, had confronted a notorious gang near the border. He didn't come back. I still remember that day, when the officer knocked on our door, hat in hand, voice trembling as he delivered the news. I stood there in the middle of the living room, feeling my heart shatter, but I didn't cry. My children were watching me, their innocent eyes waiting for their mother to explain why their father wasn't coming home. From that moment on, I became both mother and father. I worked without rest, from waitressing at a roadside diner to cleaning offices in the middle of the night. The shifts were 12 hours long, my feet swollen and aching, but I gritted my teeth and endured. I wanted my children to get an education, to wear clean clothes, to dream dreams I never had the chance to. I patched James's clothes when he tore them on the schoolyard, taught Sarah to play piano on the old instrument Frank had left behind, and held Michael every night when he cried out for his father. Every penny saved, every modest meal was for my children. I prayed each night, begging God for strength, even when all I wanted was to collapse. But my love, no matter how deep, could never fill the void Frank left behind. My children grew up in rooms heavy with memories of their father, the photo of him in uniform, that radiant smile, and the stories of a hero they only knew through words. I believed time would heal, that one day they would understand the sacrifices I made, but I was wrong. As they grew older, all 3 of my children left Boise to build their lives in big cities. They succeeded, just as I had always dreamed. But they also grew distant, not just in miles, but in heart. They began to blame me for their father's death. "You didn't stop him from going," James once said, his voice colder than ice during one of his rare visits. "If you had stood your ground, he wouldn't have died." Sarah nodded, her gaze sharp as a blade, while Michael said nothing, but that silence cut deeper than words. I tried to explain that Frank lived for justice, that no one could have stopped him, but my words vanished into the void. They looked at me like I was guilty, as if I had stolen the father they loved. The years that followed made my house feel emptier than ever. The phone rarely rang. Letters from my children came only as short Christmas cards, without a single question about how I was. I heard through an old friend that they had decided to cremate me when I died. "She doesn't need a ceremony," Sarah had said, like I was a burden even in death. I had always wished to be buried beside Frank, as our family tradition, under the old oak tree where we once carved our names. The thought that they wanted to erase even that final wish made my heart ache. They weren't just distant. They resented me, and I didn't understand why. Loneliness wrapped around me like the bitter cold of an Idaho winter. I sat in my old kitchen, staring at the empty chairs where my children once laughed, and asked myself, what did I do wrong? Was my love, all the sleepless nights, the sweat and tears, meaningless? My faith, once a flame that warmed me, now flickered like a candle in the wind. I still prayed, but my prayers were laced with doubt. Did God really hear me? Did he really care about a lonely old woman abandoned by her own children? I didn't know that. Within the darkness of that pain, a greater trial was waiting, a fateful night that would change everything. I didn't know that through suffering and death I would find the answer, not just for myself, but for the very souls I loved most. But that is the story for another day. For now, I was just a mother with a broken heart, waiting for a miracle I no longer dared to believe in. That night, the cold of the Idaho winter cut through my skin like knives, as if it were trying to devour whatever warmth I had left inside. I shuffled down the ice-covered path in front of the old wooden house in Boise, my trembling hands clutching a thin coat. I just wanted to fetch the mail, a simple habit, but for me it was a way to feel some small connection to the outside world. The world my children had long since left behind. A few Christmas cards, cold and impersonal bills. Those were the only reminders left that I still existed. The sky was pitch black, not a single star in sight, only the faint glow of a street lamp reflecting off the ice like shattered glass. I walked slowly, my cane trembling against the slippery ground. Then, in a single instant, my foot lost its grip. I flailed, reaching for the air, but it was useless. My body crashed down, my head slamming hard against the frozen ground. A sharp crack echoed, like the sound of my own bones shattering. Pain erupted, radiating from my skull down through my body, like a fire scorching every nerve ending. I lay there, motionless, warm blood trickling from my temple into the snow, forming horrifying streaks of red across the white. Every breath was a battle, my chest heavy, as though the weight of the entire world was pressing down on me. I tried to cry out, my voice hoarse, barely audible, "Help me, please, help!" But the neighborhood was still. The houses, glowing with light just a few steps away, seemed to belong to a different world. I saw the glow from windows, heard the laughter of families gathered around their fireplaces, but no one turned around. They were wrapped in their love, their warmth, their lives, and I, just an old woman, was left behind, alone in the deadly cold and the darkness of night. My heartbeat slowed, each thud a quiet whisper that my time was running out. In that moment, I didn't think about myself. I didn't think about the years of sacrifice or the pain of losing my husband. I thought of my children. Tears poured down, mixing with the blood on my face. I didn't beg to live. I didn't beg to be saved. I only whispered, with the last ounce of strength in me, "Lord, please forgive my children. Please lead them back to your light, even if I'm no longer here." My faith, once flickering like a candle in the wind, became a single, tiny flame burning in the dark. I didn't know if God could hear me, but it was all I had left. a desperate prayer for the souls I loved more than life itself. Then everything faded. The pain disappeared, as though my body no longer belonged to me. The cold, the wind, the streetlights, all of it vanished. A darkness enveloped me, deep, silent, endless. I could no longer hear my heart beating. I no longer felt the blood flowing. I thought this was the end, but I was wrong. That night was not the final period. It was the door to a journey that would take me beyond anything I had ever imagined. A journey that would change me, my children, and the very meaning of this life. A black veil enveloped me, as if the world had just closed shut. I thought that was the end. Blood had stopped flowing, breath had vanished, and the cold of the winter night no longer touched me. But then, a strange sensation stirred. I felt weightless, like a butterfly freed from its cocoon, drifting through endless space. Looking down, I saw my body lying there on the icy walkway, silver hair disheveled, red blood staining the white snow. But I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel pain, only a strange sense of freedom, as if I had shed a tight, heavy garment to become a pure soul, no longer bound by years of sorrow. A stream of light appeared, warm, tender, like the embrace of my mother when I was a child. It wasn't blinding, but radiant, soft, like dawn after a storm. That light wrapped around me, soothing every wound in my soul. The loneliness of nights spent by the empty kitchen, the pain of being turned away by my children, the resentful glances that cut like blades. I felt an infinite, profound love, as though the entire universe was whispering, "You're home." Peace washed over me, so deep I wanted to cry, not out of sadness, but from a pure joy, as though I had just recovered a part of myself long lost. I was lifted gently, like a river carrying me back to my source. The cold, the howling wind, the distant glowing houses, all faded. The space around me expanded, as if I could reach the stars. Time ceased to exist. Past, present, and future melted together, and I saw everything at once. Memories flashed by, vivid as day. My husband's smile before he left forever in that brutal fight. My children's laughter when they were small, running hand in hand through the yard. I also saw the scars, the cruel words from my children. And yet, in this moment, as I was perhaps saying goodbye to life forever, all I wanted was to reach out, to hold them close, to tell them I loved them more than life itself, that I never wanted to lose their father. My consciousness bloomed like a lotus opening in the light. I heard the wind singing, like a lullaby from the heavens. I felt the heartbeat of life, not just mine, but of all creation. A sacred presence surrounded me, formless yet filled with love and truth. I knew, deep within my soul, that I was approaching a place far beyond dreams, a place where the questions that had weighed down my heart would finally be answered. Why had my children turned away from me? Was my love not enough? And God, did He truly hear the whispered prayers I cried between sobs? That light guided me, gentle yet firm, like a lighthouse in the night. I didn't yet know that ahead of me waited a great vision, a journey that would reveal the darkness imprisoning my children, and the power of love to shatter every chain. Right now I was simply a soul, floating in the light, ready to receive the mysteries of the sacred realm, where every earthly wound would be healed. The gentle light guided me, like a river carrying me through endless heavens. And then, within this space overflowing with love, a radiant presence appeared. It wasn't a vague glow, it was a person, Jesus. Radiant like the sun, yet warm like a fireplace on a winter night. His eyes met mine, deep, overflowing with a wordless love, as if he knew every sorrow, every tear I had ever hidden. I wanted to kneel, but he lifted me, not with his hands, but with the tenderness of his very presence. I knew, deep in my soul, that he hadn't come to judge me, but to reveal the truth. He led me through my life, not like a film, but a living mosaic where every moment sparkled like a precious gem. I saw the long nights of work, my calloused hands sewing under dim lights just so James could have school books. I saw myself teaching Sarah to play piano on the old instrument, the notes echoing through our empty house after my husband's passing. I saw myself holding Michael during those nights he cried for his father, whispering that everything would be okay, even as my heart silently shattered. He didn't speak aloud, but I heard him within, gentle and powerful. Every sacrifice you made is a jewel in my eyes. Your suffering was not in vain. It was the path by which your soul grew. I wept, not out of sadness, but because I finally knew the love I had poured into my children, even if never returned, was still sacred. But then the pain surfaced again. I thought of their cold stares, the bitterness in their voices. I remembered the distance, the calls that never came, and the whisper that they would cremate me, as if to erase even the memory of their mother. I looked at him, aching to ask, why did they turn away? What did I do wrong? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he brought me to a new vision, like the skies themselves opening. I saw my children in the future, James standing in a courtroom fighting for justice, the same resolute gaze his father once had. Sarah running a community center, embracing the homeless, her smile glowing like firelight. Michael in a warm home, playing with his children. My grandchildren, their laughter rising like a hymn. They were radiant, as if their souls had been touched by the light of God. My heart burst with joy, but then, he pointed, and I saw the present. My children shrouded in thick darkness, their eyes filled with anger, their hearts closed off. Pain struck me again, like a blade to the heart. Lord, why? I whispered. He looked at me, eyes both firm and kind, and I understood. My children were in chains, not by me, but by a dark force, something that had planted hatred in their hearts. And then I knew my mission. My children still needed me, not just in their childhood, but now in this very moment, to help lead them out of that darkness. The vision faded, but his love remained, like a flame warming my soul. I knew the journey was far from over. Ahead, deeper mysteries awaited, about the darkness manipulating my children, about the choices that lead to light or to hell. But in that moment, I carried a new conviction. My love, led by the hand of God, could redeem the very souls I loved most. The gentle light of Jesus still wrapped around me, but then a chilling wind swept through, like darkness trying to creep into the sacred realm. He took my hand, not physically, but through an invisible love, and led me downward into a place of terror, where his light seemed only a faint flicker amidst suffocating shadows. This was hell, but not the blazing fire or roaring demons I had once imagined. Instead, it was a vast abyss, where the air was thick like sulfuric smoke. Time was distorted, and despair clung to everything like poisonous thorns. I saw souls, no longer bearing human form, writhing in agony. They drifted in the darkness like twisted phantoms, imprisoned by their own worst memories, the cruel words they had spoken, the selfish acts they had committed, and regrets that sliced at them endlessly like blades. Some were burned by an invisible fire, not one that came from outside, but one ignited from within, in hearts where unforgiveness and bitterness had turned into eternal embers. But what made me tremble were the souls that shimmered with the color of ash, as if their bodies had once been cremated. I saw them, faint, ghost-like figures trapped in invisible cages of ash, the remnants of their own bodies binding them like jagged chains, pulling them deeper into the darkness. They screamed, not from physical pain, but from the horror of watching their own ashes being gathered by demons, like dark gemstones glimmering in the hands of evil. Each speck of ash, I could feel, was a fragment of a soul stolen, used by the demonic to weave a web of darkness, designed to resist the light of God. "Lord, is it cremation that brought them here?" I gasped, my voice cracking, heart pounding in fear. He looked at me, his eyes stern, yet overflowing with compassion. And then a vision opened in my mind, as though he was speaking directly to my spirit. It wasn't cremation that determined their fate, but their choices, their rejection of love, their refusal to walk in the light. Cremation was merely a tool the enemy exploited, turning ashes into a dark force to strengthen hell's war against heaven. These souls, he showed me, were not condemned because of what was done to their bodies, but because their hearts had closed themselves off, unwilling to receive forgiveness or salvation. Then I saw them, the demons, not monsters with horns, but toxic currents of smoke, twisting like serpents, with eyes glowing red like burning embers and mouths that whispered malevolent words. They gathered around the cremated souls, stretching out smoky tendrils like tentacles, sucking the life essence from the shimmering ash. I saw the faint light still left in the souls being drained away, like candles snuffed out, while the demons swelled, their surrounding darkness thickening as though they were devouring space itself. One of them, its voice hoarse like wind through a graveyard, growled to the others. "The ashes of these ones are stronger. Their despair, twisted until the very end, is pure fuel. Every cremated soul is a brick in the fortress against heaven." I was horrified, realizing that the demons didn't just want my ashes, they wanted the despair of my children, manipulated into cremating their own mother. They slithered into the minds of my children. I saw James, his gaze darken as a demon whispered, "Mother, let father die." I saw Sarah, her heart turning cold as they poured in the thought, "She doesn't deserve to be remembered." And Michael, silent, but his soul was being strangled. Cremate her to erase the past. Through his deep gaze, God guided me toward a terrible truth. The demons were manipulating my children to cremate me because the ashes of a cremated soul, combined with the despair of grieving loved ones, become a dark energy they use to reinforce the shadow in their war against heaven's light. Each cremated soul, he showed me, was a small victory for them in their war against God. I trembled, wanting to scream, to pull my children from those invisible claws, but the Lord comforted me, his voice echoing in my heart, gentle but firm. "They have no power if you choose love. Your love, led by me, can break every chain." I looked at my children, my heart aching. I saw fear, unease within their souls, not because of me, but because of the lies the demons had whispered. He taught me that hell is not an eternal punishment, but the consequence of wrong choices. The souls here imprisoned themselves, not because God refused them, but because they no longer believed in redemption. Some, cremated in life, carried that pain with them, bound in darkness by the ashes of their own bodies. But it was not cremation that determined their fate. It was hearts that refused to forgive, refused to love. I thought of my children, of their plan to cremate me, and I realized they didn't want to hurt me. They were manipulated, misled, drawn off course by darkness. Hell tried to pull me down, but his light held me firm. I knew this journey wasn't over. Ahead, a greater decision awaited, about my children, about love, and the power of forgiveness. With a new flame ignited in my soul, I was ready to face what was to come, because I knew my love, guided by God, would be the light that leads my children out of the abyss. The darkness of hell still clung to me, but then the light of Jesus blazed forth, radiant like a holy flame, banishing every trace of fear. He embraced my soul, not with arms, but with an infinite love, powerful like a river that washes away all sorrow. That strength flowed through me like a fire rekindling a weary heart. I fell to my knees, tears pouring down, my voice trembling. Lord, please open my children's eyes. Let them see the truth. Let them choose love over resentment. He looked at me, his eyes both stern and gentle, like a silent promise. I felt within my soul that my children would be given the chance to return to the light, but he whispered, without words, "You must go back. You are the lamp to guide them." A powerful force pulled me from the light, painful as if my soul were being forced into a cage of iron. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, the white light of the hospital stabbing into my pupils. My children stood around me, their eyes filled with worry, but still holding the familiar cold distance. James whispered, "Mom, you're awake." But I could still see the resentment lingering in their eyes, like shadows of the demons hiding in the corners. I reached out and held Sarah's hand, weakly, and whispered, "The Lord showed me all of you." They exchanged glances, skeptical, but I sensed a flicker of hope, like a candle fighting through a storm. Recovery was a long and difficult journey. My body was weak, bones aching, every step felt like carrying a mountain. But my soul was stronger than ever, ignited by the visions from God. Through therapy and long nights of prayer, I overcame the haunting memories of hell, the writhing souls, the smoke-like demons. I knew I couldn't keep the experience to myself. One evening, the whole family gathered around the old kitchen table, for the first time since they had all moved out. I told them everything. I spoke about their father's death, not as my fault, but as the destiny he chose in the name of justice. I told them about the demons, the whispering shadows, sowing lies and bitterness in their hearts, leading them to cremate me. I revealed the terrifying truth. The demons feed on the ashes of cremated souls to strengthen their power against the light of God. At first they scoffed, thinking I was delusional. Sarah shook her head. "Mom, it was just a dream." Michael stayed silent, his gaze filled with doubt. James sighed. "You don't need to make up stories to stop us from cremating you." But I didn't stop. I spoke of the radiant future I saw. James fighting for justice, Sarah serving the homeless, Michael raising a joyful home. I looked them straight in the eyes, my voice unwavering. "The Lord showed me that you are light, but you must choose to leave the darkness behind." For the first time, I saw hesitation in their eyes, as if something I said had reached a hidden place deep inside. I forgave them, not because the pain had vanished, but to free myself. I learned from God that forgiveness is the key to the door of light. I encouraged them to face the pain, not just with me, but within themselves, and the years they had lived under the demon's manipulation. Gradually, a miracle unfolded. James began visiting, bringing stories about his work, and the hardness in his eyes began to soften. Sarah started calling, sharing her dream of opening a community center, her voice warm again, like when she was a child. Michael, on a rainy afternoon, held me tightly and sobbed, "Mom, I'm sorry for staying away." They agreed to bury me as I had wished, beneath the oak tree where their father once carved our names, abandoning the plan to cremate me. I knew this wasn't just reconciliation, it was victory over the darkness. I began sharing my story at church, standing before strangers and telling them about hell, about demons, and about the love of God. My words touched them, like fire rekindling lost hearts. Years later, the vision God had shown me came true. James became a lawyer, fighting for the voiceless. Sarah opened her community center, bringing hope to the homeless. Michael built a family, surrounded by children who called me Grandma Flame. They gathered around me in my final days, their eyes full of love, calling me the flame of God, not just because of the story, but because of the love I never gave up on. I lived simply, in the same old wooden house, cherishing every moment. the laughter of grandchildren, sunlight streaming through the window, prayers whispered each night. I knew that through suffering and death, I had found purpose, that love and faith could shatter any darkness, not just for me, but for the souls I loved most. When the day came for me to leave this world, I smiled, at peace, knowing I had fulfilled the mission God gave me, to lead my children back to the light and to leave behind a flame that will never die. And so Eleanor's letter comes to a close. As I read the final lines, I can't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude that her family found their way back to love, that the cracks between them were finally mended. Her life had been marked by sorrow, but in the final chapter of her story, what remained was not pain, but peace, purpose, and above all, a love so powerful that even darkness could not extinguish it. What changed Eleanor's journey was the fact that someone else chose how she would leave this world. But somewhere out there are those who must make that decision themselves, to choose how they will depart when death draws near, and to face consequences that may follow their soul forever. There is a man, a terminal cancer patient, quietly preparing for his own death, and he has chosen cremation. We often believe that cremation is merely a respectful final act for the departed body, that once the soul leaves the flesh it simply returns to God, free from any further consequence. But today's story will make you rethink that assumption. This man had even planned his own death after receiving a terminal diagnosis, but God had another plan. He was taken beyond the veil of this world, where he witnessed terrifying spiritual realities and was shown a truth few have ever imagined, about the souls of those who were cremated. If you've ever wondered what truly happens after death, especially for those who choose cremation, then stay with us through the very end of this testimony. Don't miss the profound revelations. This may be the message from God that your spirit has been waiting to hear. Before we begin, remember, God is always near to those who seek Him with a sincere heart. Leave a comment with your name and the city you live in as a declaration before heaven, so that the Lord knows your name and the prayers you hold inside. And be sure to like and subscribe, because every action you take here is more than a click, it is a call of faith. Now let us hear his testimony. My name is Richard Langston, 61 years old, living in Flagstaff, Arizona. I never thought that one day I would be telling this story in front of thousands of people. For nearly 2 years, I kept everything that happened on that fateful night to myself, not because I was afraid of being judged, but because I needed time to process everything I had been through. Before everything started to change, I was a man who lived by principles, reason, and pride in always having control over life. I used to be a civil engineer, retiring early after discovering I had late-stage pancreatic cancer. To me, death was the final equation of life, and I had planned for it like any other project. I had already chosen cremation, prepared the urn, written my will, and even made a playlist for the memorial service. I believed that if death was inevitable, then at the very least I could control how I faced it. I thought I was ready. But on that fateful night, when an unusual stabbing pain spread across my abdomen, I knew something wasn't like before. I reached for my phone to dial emergency services, but then I hesitated. The desk lamp cast its light on a half-written page, the letter I still hadn't finished for my son. My dear son, if one day I'm no longer here, I had written up to that point, when suddenly I felt a tightness in my chest and the entire world spun around me. I collapsed, the pen slipping from my hand, rolling into the darkness of a night I didn't yet know would take me so far. I didn't know if I had truly died or was simply floating between two realms, but I was certain of one thing. All of my rational preparations, all the tidiness, organization, and calm I had once been so proud of, in that moment suddenly felt hollow. No plan could help me face the absolute loneliness of my final moments. The only thing left was an unfinished letter and a love that had yet to be spoken. I once thought death was a stopping point, but that night I began to understand it is a doorway, and I, Richard Langston, had stepped up to that threshold, far less prepared than I had imagined. I didn't see myself entering a tunnel, nor was I pulled toward a light. Instead, everything around me slowly faded, giving way to a strange space. No walls, no ceiling, no floor, just an undefined void where memories began to rise, not in chronological order, but like fragments assembling themselves around me. I saw myself, at the age of 32, sitting in my office, door closed, headphones on, while my toddler son sat crying in the living room after falling off a chair. My wife called me 3 times, then 4. I didn't answer. I remember thinking, he's just crying a little, it's nothing. But now I saw the look in my wife's eyes at that moment, tired, heavy, as if she had just suffered a deep wound no one could see. I had never thought I was hurting anyone, but now in this space I could feel exactly what they had felt, and it took the breath out of me. Another scene appeared. I slammed the phone down on the table after a tense call with my son at age 17. He had just confessed to me that he wanted to quit studying engineering to pursue music. I didn't ask why, I just shouted, "You're not going to humiliate your father like that." I saw his face darken, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. In that moment something inside him broke, and I never got that part of him back. Then came the most familiar image, my wife and I in the final year of her life. I was exhausted from caregiving, irritable over trivial things, even walked out one afternoon when she had a high fever. I told her, "You're always so weak." Now I saw her lying in bed, turned toward the wall, teeth clenched, enduring it. Not because of the illness, but because of loneliness. Then she appeared, gentle, calm, but with something deeply sad in her eyes. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "I forgive you, but our son, he's never once heard a word of love from you." At the moment she said that, the whole space seemed to freeze. I don't know what word to use to describe what I felt in that moment. Pain, shame, shock, and emptiness. My heart felt like it was being crushed. I wanted to say something, to object, to explain myself, but all the memories I had just witnessed played back like an irrefutable indictment. I had been a father who believed that strictness was love, that providing was enough, that parenting had to begin with pressure, not a hug. And now, all the things I once thought were right echoed back at me like a cold bell ringing through my soul. When I opened my eyes again, I smelled the scent of antiseptic and heard the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The hospital room was stark white. The fluorescent light stung my eyes. My body felt heavy, every movement dragged backward by something invisible. Exhaustion, weariness, and an overwhelming sadness with no name. I realized that I was still alive, but the first question that appeared in my mind wasn't why, it was, what for? I slowly turned my head and saw the old envelope the nurse had left on the table, the will I had written 6 months earlier. Inside was everything: funeral instructions, account passwords, life insurance large enough for my son to live without financial worry for the rest of his life. I closed my eyes, thoughts spinning endlessly. If I were gone, my son would be free from a father full of shadows. He could live his own life freely. No more judgment, no more pressure, no more being pulled back to the things I had done wrong. I felt my tears fall, not from fear of death, but because for the first time in my life, I felt that my death could be my final gift, the way I could love my son without hurting him any further. I thought about ending everything. At this age, with this illness, it would only take one small decision, one button pressed, one tube removed, and everything would be quiet forever. But just then, I heard footsteps rushing into the room. Someone was calling my name. The voice was trembling, choked with emotion. I didn't have time to open my eyes before everything spun. My vision blurred, my heart pounded wildly, my breath came in gasps. And then I left my body again. I floated above, looking down at myself lying on the hospital bed, the aged, frail body surrounded by tubes and machines. The doctors rushed in and began CPR. Alarms blared. But I focused on only one thing: my son. He was kneeling beside the bed, clutching my hand, tears streaming down his face. He begged me not to leave him, said he just wanted to hear that I was proud of him. My heart shattered. That sentence, the one I had never said, was what my son had longed for all his life. I wanted to hold him, wipe away his tears, and tell him I was proud of him, but I was only a soul, powerless, watching the scene like a knife carving into my chest. Everything seemed too late now, perhaps beyond saving. Then a flash of light erupted and pulled me in. I didn't know how I had been taken there. There was no tunnel, no voice calling, only a transition as gentle as a final breath, dissolving into the invisible realm. As the light from my second departure receded, I found myself standing in a land unlike anything I had ever imagined about the afterlife. There were no golden gates, no angels with radiant halos, no hymns echoing like in the stories. In front of me was an open space stretching endlessly, with no beginning and no end, expanding like a plane woven from millions of threads of shimmering light. That light didn't dazzle, but caressed softly, like a mother's hand laid on the forehead of a feverish child. The sky wasn't blue or grey, but held a pearlescent hue, suspended, slowly shifting as if it were breathing, as if this very place were a living being. The air here wasn't just air, it was like a gentle stream flowing through every cell. No wind blew, yet something moved lightly across my skin, like a fine velvet cloak laid gently by the very presence of peace. I didn't feel like I was standing on ground, but rather being held up by something unseen, yet full of love. I took a deep breath and realized there was no scent of flowers, no smell of grass, no incense or perfume. It was a fragrance that didn't belong to the physical world, pure, sweet, as clear as a child's laughter, and as profound as the memory of a long-lost home. Each breath did more than sustain life. It carried with it a healing memory, as if every cell within me was being transfused with a substance drawn from eternity itself. The sound here did not come from any instrument, had no lyrics, no rhythm, yet it echoed within me like a stream flowing through the heart. It didn't need to be loud, didn't need to be clear, because it didn't need ears to hear. It only needed the soul to feel. Every vibration of that sound was like a whisper from God Himself, spoken in a language that only the purest part of me could understand. And then, in the midst of that shifting light, I saw him. The man I had called father my whole life, but never truly felt like a son to. He hadn't changed much from the image I held in my memory, the same stern gaze, broad shoulders and steady stride, but this time he wasn't cold. This time he did not carry the oppressive shadow of authority that once suffocated me. He stood there, silent, as if he had been waiting for me through both life and death. I never thought I would see him again, especially not here, in a place drenched in light where only what is pure may remain. My whole life I had resented him, for the beatings, for the cold eyes, for never once telling me I had done well. I swore I would never become him, and yet in the end I had mirrored him. In the way I stayed silent before my son's tears, in the way I used hardness to mask love. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We walked toward each other like two wanderers who had finally found their way home after countless seasons lost. He opened his arms, and I, without thinking, without defense, without dignity, fell into them like a child. I didn't know why I was crying, but the tears came endlessly, as though they were the final remnants of all the unspoken pain. We held each other, and in that embrace, I felt the shattered pieces of my soul begin to mend. No one apologized, no one blamed, but everything that needed forgiveness was forgiven, and everything that needed love was loved. For the first time in my life, I felt light. So light I thought I might dissolve into the light at any moment. I don't know how long we held each other. It might have been a few seconds, it might have been a lifetime. When I opened my eyes, he had vanished into the light ahead. Quietly, without a goodbye, but leaving behind a gentle emptiness within me, like a beautiful scar after a long healing. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask him about my mother. I wanted to sit with him under some tree in this luminous land and hear him tell a story he never got to share, but he was gone. And I knew some encounters happen only once, but are enough to erase a lifetime of misunderstanding. Some hugs, though late, still have the power to save a soul from decay. And there are places like heaven, where time does not flow forward like it does on earth, but instead settles into eternity within each moment that is truly lived, truly loved, and truly forgiven. I stood there for a long time. I was no longer crying. I only felt my heart lighten, as if I had just laid down a backpack I'd carried my entire life. And then I heard his voice, not from ahead, not from behind, but from within me. It is time to move on, but you will carry this healing with you. And then that gentle light slowly receded, like the tide withdrawing from a distant sea, leaving me alone in a space that was cold and undefined. Everything around me darkened, not the blackness of night, but a dense black like swamp mud. Heavy, sticky, slowing every step as if being dragged by unnamed sins. The air here had a strange smell, like burning flesh, mixed with the musty scent of earth that hadn't seen light for ages. Sound didn't echo outward, but reverberated inward, as if I were stepping into the belly of my own being, the place where all that I had denied was hidden. Figures began to appear. Not quite human, but not quite demonic either. They were twisted silhouettes, writhing within endless loops of personal memories, like old videotapes stuck replaying a painful scene until the soul itself was torn apart by it. Some stood frozen, eyes wide open, staring at a distant void that didn't exist. Others mumbled to themselves incoherent words, as though trying to justify something no one had asked about. No one was chained, but no one moved from where they stood. I realized nothing held them there, except themselves. Then I saw a man hunched on the ground, clutching his head as if trying to silence the voices inside. I approached, and my heart clenched. It was me, not a symbol or a metaphor, but truly me, with graying hair, vacant eyes, and slumped shoulders as if bearing a mountain of guilt. I watched myself, clawing at the ground, screaming wordlessly, repeating the same phrase over and over. I deserve this. A voice rang out, not from anywhere around, but as if it rose from within my bones. If you do not change today, you will drag yourself here. I turned and saw it was the voice of the one my soul had recognized in heaven, Jesus Christ. To my left, another soul was sinking into the mire of memory. It was a woman, her face blurred by tears and dirt, her trembling hands reaching out only to retreat again, as if afraid of being seen. For reasons I didn't understand, I stepped forward. I knelt and tried to lift her. My fingers touched hers, and a scream tore through the void like the cry of a wounded beast from the depths of its soul. I don't deserve to be forgiven. That voice wasn't just sharp, it was so full of despair that the entire place seemed to tremble. I pulled back, not out of fear, but because I realized she didn't want redemption. Then I saw a soul curled up on the ashes. his entire body smeared with filth, as if he had crawled through a decaying life. He clawed at the grey ground, broken nails bleeding, yet he continued, as if trying to retrieve something long lost. His mouth repeated, in a trembling voice hoarse like it had been scorched by fire, "I just chose cremation. I didn't do anything evil. I just wanted to leave quietly." That sound didn't travel outward. It pulled inward, colliding against the walls of my own mind. There was something in that whisper, eerily familiar, as if I were hearing my own fear spoken from the mouth of another. I stood frozen. Then a question burst forth from me, not in words, but from deep within my soul, like a breath breaking free from a clenched fist of doubt. I also chose cremation. So, what does that mean? I turned and saw him. That light was still him, but it was no longer the gentleness of heaven. Now it was cold and sharp, like a blade of silver slicing silently through every layer of excuse and doctrine I had built to shield myself from the truth. He stood there, not advancing, not retreating, his eyes fixed on me, long, deep, as though he was seeing through to the farthest corners of memory even I had forgotten I carried. Ashes may return to the earth, but where the soul goes, that depends on how you lived. I stood there stunned. Every answer I had once believed I possessed crumbled. It wasn't about cremation or burial, not about rituals or urns. It was about how the heart had lived, before it stopped beating. To the left, another soul was sunken deep into the sticky mud of memory. It was a man whose face mirrored mine so uncannily it chilled me. The same hair, the same scar, the same slumped weariness. I stepped closer, driven by an instinct to pull him up. My fingers barely touched him when a shrill scream tore the air, shrieking like metal scraping against bone. "I don't deserve to be forgiven." That sentence didn't just echo, it ignited. It ripped through the atmosphere as though he had used his very words to set his soul on fire, slamming shut the door of redemption himself. I stepped back, not out of fear, but because I understood. No one can rescue a soul that doesn't want to be saved. I turned to look at the Lord, but he said nothing more. The thick darkness gradually faded like smoke torn apart by a blade of light, but this light wasn't for comfort or healing. It sliced open the shadows only to reveal another place, without color, without scent, without sensation. A blank whiteness, but not soothing. All motion stopped, and I stood in a different reality, like a waiting room for souls, where there were no whispers, no breaths of wind, only my consciousness spinning like a stopped clock, still trying to count time. And then an image appeared, not hazy like a dream, not shimmering like a vision, but clear, as if I was standing at the edge of a life no longer mine. A small room with faded grey walls, a dim yellow light casting shadows across the grain of wooden bookshelves. The room didn't look poor, but worn, as if the one living there had forgotten how to befriend joy. And in the middle of that room was my son. He was no longer the barefoot boy running across the yard, stick in hand like a wooden sword, shouting for me as his hero. In front of me was a man, his hair already graying, shoulders hunched by a burden no one could see. His eyes were sunken, his gaze lost. His face bore the lines of time's slow erosion, but it was the absence of emotion that clutched my heart the hardest. He sat there, alone, in a silence so thick it became its own presence. In his hands was a photo frame. I couldn't see clearly who was in the picture, but I knew it was me. His eyes were fixed on the photo, as if trying to find something that might still remain. I couldn't hear his thoughts, but I could feel them. He had lived his whole life with an unnamed emptiness, and no one had ever filled it. I felt breathless. Not from fear, but because for the first time I understood the cost of silence. I had never hit him, never abandoned him, never insulted him. But I had also never held him when he trembled, never said "I love you" when he needed it most. I had loved him in my heart, but let that love die in my silence and blind pride. I watched that scene like someone severed from their own breath. I wanted to scream, to shatter the wall between us, to hold him and say everything I'd never had the courage to say. And then he appeared again, Jesus, with eyes no longer stern but carrying the quiet sorrow of one who has witnessed too many hearts broken by words left unspoken. He didn't raise his voice, he simply asked, gently, but the words struck like lightning into the core of my being, "Do you want to live again, or let him lose his father a second time, while his father is still alive?" I couldn't answer. My throat locked tight, my knees buckled beneath the weight of that question. My tears fell, tears I hadn't cried in an entire lifetime, not from fear, but because, for the first time, I saw clearly how far I had drifted and who was paying the price for it. All I could do was kneel at his feet, my whole being trembling like a lost child, and say, repeating it over and over like a man dying of thirst who has finally found the wellspring of grace, "Please let me return, just once, so I can tell him I love him, so he won't live his whole life as a shadow, so he'll know he was never abandoned." I don't remember if he nodded. I only remember the light rising around me like waves of white, carrying me, pulling me downward, swift and deep, as if I were being... The first sensation when I came back wasn't a glorious light or an overwhelming surge of joy. It was a dull, twisting pain, as if my soul had just been stitched back together with thorned thread. My chest felt clawed open, my spine burned, and every cell in my body seemed to wrestle just to reclaim life. I didn't open my eyes right away, but I heard everything. The rush of medical machines, someone calling my name from nearby, and that hand, my son's hand, still gripping mine with every ounce of strength he had left. I wanted to say something, but my throat was parched. My lips moved in silent effort. He leaned in close, his ear near my mouth, and I whispered, slowly, brokenly, "Son, I'm proud of you." He burst into tears. He embraced me, trembling, afraid to hold me too tightly, as if I might disappear again the moment he let go. And I, no longer bracing myself as the stoic father, no longer hiding behind the mask of control and reason, let the tears flow freely. The days that followed were a slow but meaningful recovery. I listened to my son as he recounted the long nights he lived in fear and loneliness, unable to be himself in the presence of his own father. I heard the silences between us, silences I had never noticed before, spaces that didn't need words, only presence, only acknowledgement. I rewrote my will, not as a man preparing to die, but as someone who had just chosen to live with responsibility. Each morning, I stepped onto the balcony, letting the early sunlight warm my face, a reminder that I was still here. I brewed 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for my son, and I never forgot to say, "I love you," whether it was the 2nd, 3rd, or 100th time. Because I now know that some words, no matter how late, still have the power to save a soul from shattering. And sometimes that soul isn't someone else's, it's your own. I once believed my life had ended in that cold hospital room, that my heart had stopped beating and I would never get the chance to make things right. But it turns out, what I thought was a period at the end of my life was only the beginning of a new journey, not one of survival, but of healing. As my body gradually recovered, the first conversations I had with my son were like invisible threads slowly stitching together the torn fabric between 2 generations. I told him what I had seen, not through logic, not through religion, but through the rawest truth I had ever felt, when my soul wandered through both heaven and hell. At first he just listened in silence, his gaze filled with doubt, though no longer cold, as if he were trying to determine what was real and what might be a desperate fabrication by a father trying to reclaim lost time. Then, one afternoon, beneath the pale sunlight after a gentle rain as we sat together on the porch, he turned to me and softly said, "If you can be forgiven, then I'll learn to forgive too." One late afternoon, as I was folding up my notebook to leave the support group meeting, a young man approached. His face thin, head shaved, eyes weary, like he'd cried through the night but was still trying to stand tall. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me for a while, then quietly said, "I'm not sure I believe, but I'm scared. Scared of pain. Scared I won't have time to become someone who matters." I simply looked at him, long and deep, as if my eyes could carry all the unspoken truths that words fail to express, the terror of a soul staring into the abyss, and the absolute gentleness when true love enters in. Then I smiled. Not a smile that promised miracles, not one that reassured or demanded faith, but a whisper of a smile that said, "You are not alone, you are seen, and you are loved." He lowered his head, and tears fell as though they had waited for a single nod to be released. I didn't wipe them away, didn't offer comfort. I simply sat there, present, steady as a rock in the storm. And then, amid the lingering pain, he smiled back, just a small smile, not yet whole, but the very first step into faith. When I heard Richard's story, I couldn't hold back my tears, not because he had seen heaven or hell, but because he had seen himself. He saw all the things he should have said, should have done, should have loved, but missed. Richard may have had the luxury of planning his final goodbye, but the woman in our next story wasn't given that choice. She was betrayed and strangled to death by the very man she once called the love of her life. She was ripped from this world by cruelty, but God pulled her into a journey greater than life itself, where she witnessed sacred truths surrounding cremation. If you think you've endured unbearable pain, stay for this next story, because sometimes, right in the heart of betrayal, God opens a path to eternal redemption.